So you're in the deep, dark, disgustingly humid Louisiana bayou and your partner's been shot dead. Shot down like a dog in the street. You're surrounded, cut off from support as zombies stalk towards your location. Enemy hunters are closing in as well, loaded for bear with rifles and explosives, and they're about to shoot your ass up. You can't run. You don't have time to hide. What are you gonna do about it? Before I tell you what Hunt Showdown is, how about I show you? Just a heads up, a good chunk of the clips in this video are played on low settings. That is intentional. I'll talk about why I do that a little bit later. Total War has been the focus here since the start of milkandcookiesTW, but the FPS genre is nothing new to me. I grew up with games like Halo, Timesplitters 2, Call of Duty, Battlefield Bad Company, Doom, and Rainbow Six. You name it, I've probably played it. And a more recent trend in video game history is an extension of those classic shooters. The rise of the Battle Royale. Games like PUBG, Fortnite, and Apex Legends are some of the most wildly successful games of the last decade. But it's a trend that never really interested me. Never really got me excited. That is, until Hunt Showdown came along. And to be fair, you can make a pretty damn good argument that this is not a Battle Royale game, but it certainly shares some elements of that genre. So, after 200 hours of murdering monsters and good old-fashioned gunslinging in the Louisiana Bayou, I want to introduce you guys to one of the most unique and atmospheric shooters I have ever had the pleasure of playing. At its core, Hunt Showdown is a competitive FPS set in the Deep South in the late 1800s. One foot in the Wild West, and the other foot kind of in a modern age with all the crazy tech leading up to World War I. It's a fantasy setting, obviously, but it's grounded in reality. Entire towns have fallen silent as disease and death stalk the land, and creatures straight out of hell have spilled out onto the mortal plane and corrupted the people who live there. Your job is to march into one of these towns, find the boss with the bounty on its head by picking up clues throughout the map, kill it, and escape before the creatures of the night or the other hunters can kill you. So what you've got is essentially a PvP game with a lot of PvE elements, a horror backdrop, and a heavy emphasis on gunplay. And this is post-Civil War America with a supernatural twist we're talking about here. So all the famous gun designs of the era show up with a bit of extra flair. Winchester, Colt, Sharps, Mauser, and Browning with single-action revolvers, double-barrel shotguns, bolt-action rifles, and a few more creative and inspired designs as well, like the Bomb Lance or Concertina Wire. There's even a full-auto Mosin for those of you guys who want to roleplay as Tony Montana. It's in early access right now, $30 price point, but it's releasing officially on August 27th with the 1.0 update. Lots of stuff will be changing with that, but won't go into those details right now. There are two game modes base. Quick Play, which takes 10 solo players and puts them in a race to scavenge gear and fight over a diminishing pool of bounty, and is closer to a traditional style of Battle Royale game, a game mode that I frankly don't like very much and won't spend too much time talking about. And then there's Bounty Hunt, which in my opinion is the way to play Hunt Showdown. You spawn in solo or with a partner. You go after Charlotte's Web, Babe the Butcher, or Ezio Auditore's Dementor, whichever bosses are actually on the map. Take the bounty after you've murdered them, and try to not get no-scope from across the bayou by any of the 8 other hunters who are now trying desperately to plop you into an early grave. And this game mode is what makes Hunt Showdown so special. The game mode that distills every element that makes Hunt, Hunt, and boils it down into a glorious free-for-all of insanity. and I think it's the asymmetrical nature of its gameplay that makes it so appealing. When you spawn in, you have a ton of options at your disposal. The world's a sandbox, essentially. You can go loud immediately, attracting enemy teams to your location right at the start if you're confident in PvP and want to quickly eliminate some of the biggest threats on the map, or you can try and take it a little bit more cautiously. Entirely avoid PvP and march through the swamps killing zombies with your saber or knife or knuckle dusters and earning XP the good old-fashioned way. You can choose to beeline right for a boss, taking it silently with melee weapons and fire, or you can camp it, setting up in a perfect spot and waiting for the teams you know will eventually show up. Sometimes you can kill a boss and make a ton of noise and no one comes knocking until you finish vanishing and collecting the bounty. You start sprinting towards the extract, thinking you're safe, and suddenly 2 teams are hot on your ass, trying to keep you from escaping in a running gun battle and mad dash for the exit. Sometimes all the teams are on the other side of the map and just ignore you, granting a free avenue of escape and free money essentially. Sometimes these games erupt into 10-person firefights in and around a single compound, like in this section of gameplay right here, and other times you only see a handful of real players the entire match. When you get to a boss or get into a team fight, suddenly you aren't just focused on one threat. Your attention might get pulled in 2 or 3 or 4 different directions. Just by the very act of shooting or running, making noise, ambient enemies will start honing in on your location. And suddenly those crap tier zombies and AI that are normally useless in a one-on-one fight with a player are a whole hell of a lot more dangerous, because you've got to worry about them while under a steady hail of gunfire from real players. But a lot of this completely comes down to the choices the player makes during the course of a match. The weapons you choose, how loud you want to be, where you want to move, whether you burn down players to force their partner into the open for a risky revive, all dictate how a hunt progresses. And I think that's a big part of the appeal. No game ever plays the same. Tension is at the very core of what Hunt Showdown is all about, because death matters. It's the crux of the entire experience. You only get one life with your hunter. Once they're dead for good, and you're not getting them back, no matter how much you've leveled them up or pampered them with equipment. You can spend 1,500 Bayou bucks on weapons and a fancy hunter, and die in the first 2 minutes after loading in. Or you can spend nothing on a hunter, rock a default loadout, and run the gauntlet, killing 6 players along the way, and extracting with all the bounties on the map. That's the best feeling ever. There's no pay to win or grinding elements really at all. Basic weapons are, generally speaking, more than capable of competing, and a big reason for that is because headshots are so important. Even with small caliber pistols, if you hit a headshot or a point blank shotgun blast, enemy hunters are gonna drop like a load of bricks. Some of my best runs ever have been with default loadouts and with the cheapest weapons in the game. And plenty of times where I went in, fully kitted out with a tier 3 hunter, loaded for bear with expensive weapons and a ton of supporting equipment, I just ended up getting killed in my first gunfight. It happens all the time. And I think the weapon balance, all things considered, is pretty good as well. With that said, there are guns that are way better than others. Facing a Dolch semi-auto or a Crowning King at close range is a problem for most loadouts. If you're rocking a basic-ass break-action Romero shotgun, your margin for error is going to be way smaller than someone using something like a Mosin automatic rifle. But the difference is, paying for a Mosin auto requires you to win a double bounty game and basically make $1,000, which isn't the easiest thing in the world. You can get like 15 Romero shotguns for that same price. And if you get the drop on a player with better weapons, or shoot first and more accurately than they do, it doesn't matter how much money they spent. They're still gonna die. And thanks sweet baby Jesus, you cannot buy weapons with real money. It all comes from currency earned in-game. If you're extracting safely with a bounty on at least a semi-regular basis, it's pretty hard to run out of money. But even if you do, you can just pick up a free hunter with randomized weapons that's available after every mission. I definitely have some gripes with the weapon balance though. For one, the game separates bullet travel time and damage through 3 different ammo types: compact, medium, and long. Compact is used by most pistols and repeaters in the game, like the Winfield. It has the slowest muzzle velocity, the least penetration through walls, and the least damage overall. Long ammo is used by most bolt-action rifles like the Lebel and the Mosin Nagant, and perhaps most famously, the Caldwell Conversion Uppercut, the classic Wild West-style revolver that packs a punch from medium to long range. These weapons are the most damaging in the game. Now, one of the biggest issues I've had with the weapon balancing in the last few months is that the uppercut, which is admittedly an incredibly satisfying gun to use, performs the exact same role as long-range rifles for half the investment. It only takes up a sidearm slot, which means it can be paired with any weapon in the game. And because there's no bullet drop, which frankly I find pretty strange in a game that's so clearly designed for a hardcore shooter audience, and it uses long ammo, its muzzle velocity and performance is just as good as weapons that are 2 or 3 times more expensive and take up a large slot. This obviously doesn't make any sense. Pistols should not be out shooting or on even ground with rifles at long range. Their muzzle velocity and accuracy should not be even remotely comparable. Essentially, the uppercut rounds out just about any loadout, making players a threat from long range and up close with minimal investment. Making it a medium-sized weapon instead of a sidearm would have been my suggestion on how to balance such a powerful weapon for the cost, so you'd have to give up running a large weapon or run an expensive perk in exchange. But thankfully, this is being addressed in the 1.0 update, amongst many other things, and its bullet travel time is being nerfed, which is a pretty elegant way to handle it, I think. There are quite a few little things like this that you'll start noticing over time if you pick up the game, but again, generally speaking, the weapon balance is in a pretty good spot. With that said, the skill curve in Hunt Showdown is super high. I'm not gonna lie about that. Once you've gotten out of newbie bracket and you're past that early grace period that allows you to keep your dead hunters, things can get pretty rough for a bit. This game has a very small and very dedicated player base, and a lot of the people who play it are really goddamn good. People have been playing non-stop since it launched in early access a year and a half ago. The kind of people who won't blink at doming you from 150 meters on a dead sprint. The kind of people who've been playing FPS games for more than a decade. Those guys on a mouse and keyboard are scary to play against, and there are quite a few of them on the game. The good thing for new players, though, the thing that means you probably shouldn't get scared away right away, is that there will be a lot of new blood come August 27th when Hunt goes official on Steam. So the Bambis won't be thrown right to the wolves off the bat. And thankfully, it does give you that grace period in the early levels of your bloodline that kind of lets you grow accustomed to the mechanics of the game and get used to everything before you're thrown into the meat grinder. Now, speaking of bloodlines, let's talk about in-game economy, equipment, and how you level up your hunter. Anytime you kill anything, you get XP, and this goes towards leveling up. If you survive a run, you can buy traits based on how many levels your hunter earned in that run. If your hunter dies, you lose all the weapons and progression he was carrying, and half the XP he earned goes towards your bloodline. This bloodline is the overall progression system that unlocks weapons and perks for purchase, and once a player reaches the top rank, they can choose to prestige and start all over again, which in the new update will earn them visual upgrades, but nothing physical or no better weapons that are actually better than anybody else's. There are a couple ways to power level in Hunt Showdown too. One is to get your hunter maxed out and then continue playing and winning games with them, because all XP earned after level 50 goes straight into your bloodline. So that can be an incredibly lucrative way to level up. The problem with that is that it can take 5 to 10 games to even make it to level 50. Games filled with team fights and scary extractions and entire maps worth of enemies trying to murder you. Getting to 50 and then continuing to win multiple games after that is incredibly difficult for pretty much all players. There are a handful of elites who are very, very good at doing that, but those are the best of the best. So the quickest way to level up your bloodline is to get them to level 25 and then retire them immediately, because all their XP will go straight into your bloodline and you get to keep their weapons and their equipment. And getting to level 25 only takes a handful of winning games, maybe 2 or 3, so it's a fairly simple process. Money is earned through looting dead players, finding cash registers, and most importantly, extracting from the map safely with bounties in tow after you've killed 1 or 2 of the bosses. Now, besides the pretty straightforward large, medium, small weapon slot system, where you can choose to carry either 2 medium-sized weapons or 1 large and 1 small, you can also bring equipment along for the ride. These range from throwing knives to concertina wire bombs that cause bleeding and prevent movement through a choke point, to gunshot decoys and glass containers filled with wasps that chase nearby enemies and poison them when thrown. My usual setup is knuckle dusters, medkits, and throwing knives with a vitality shot, frag bomb, and flash bomb. Dusters are honestly the only melee weapon you're ever gonna need. They're essential for dealing with immolators quickly and safely, and can punch out pretty much any other threat in the Bayou. And throwing knives give you a really nice silent ranged option perfect for killing zombies or hives when you need to be quiet. And sound design is such a huge component of Hunt, it really can't be overstated. Footsteps will echo throughout buildings, large caliber rifles can be heard clear across the map, enemies and ambient creatures will react to gunfire and loud movement, and across each map there are crows and dying horses and kennel dogs that will freak out if you get anywhere near them. So hunters will use these to hone in on your position and try and ambush you. And if you make too much noise, a lot of time, it can lead straight to your death. So with all that said, you need a good pair of headphones or an awesome surround sound setup if you want to play. Footsteps and avoiding ambient creatures can be life and death in a lot of situations. There's even a trait called Beast Face that makes it more difficult for ducks and crows to react to your presence. Speaking of traits, these are pretty straightforward. They make your hunter better in certain aspects of the game. If you want to snipe, there are a few that let you continue aiming through the scope after firing a shot, and one that steadies your weapon sway the longer you're on target through that scope. Fanning, Greyhound, Determination, and Quartermaster are some of the best traits in the game, bar none. Fanning gives you the option to literally fan the hammer on single action revolvers, which can turn a weapon from a pretty piss poor close quarters combat option into an absolute beast in CQB. And then Greyhound and Determination are your EPO blood doping Lance Armstrong traits. They let you run and use endurance better as you go through the map. And then there's Quartermaster, which is a very expensive trait that allows you to carry a medium weapon in your secondary slot, so you can go full Halo style with the shoddy snipes. But remember, this is not a pure battle royale game, and though I've kind of glanced over the ambient enemies so far, because I think the PvP is what makes the game so tense and rewarding and special, the undead still have a huge role to play, and they're kind of what makes the game unique. From a visual perspective, some of the most interesting enemy designs I've ever seen in any game, period. Hives are a great example. Zombie ladies, essentially, with wasp nests growing out of their upper torso. The entire upper half of their body is bent sideways and ripped open to allow the hive access to the open air. And this means you can only headshot them from a handful of angles. So not only is the design really creepy, but it fills a functional gameplay element as well. And if you aggro them, they'll send out a horde of angry wasps that poison and severely damage you if you hang around. Immolators are another good example. They're super fast fire scaly boys that explode if you pierce their bodies, so you need blunt weapons to take them out quickly. And meatheads are headless abominations that poop out poisonous slugs and only react to sound, and so on. These ambients aren't quite as dangerous to the player as they used to be, and aren't usually challenging in isolation. Once you've gotten used to them, of course, you'll probably die to them a few times, but they can be absolutely brutal when combined with enemy hunters that are turning you into Swiss cheese at the same time. Try running away from two shotgun-wielding hunters while getting punched in the face by an immolator, or ripped apart by a pack of dogs, and it typically doesn't end very nicely. But you can do the same thing to enemies, screwing with them by forcing undead to aggro in the middle of a fight, and that's when things get real insane. The horror elements of Hunt Showdown are honestly pretty subdued. I mean, fighting the spider, or the butcher, or walking in a room full of zombies for the first time might freak you out those first few times you see them, but that feeling fades away pretty quick. Familiarity breeds contempt, obviously, which will lead to your death more times than you'd care to admit, because like I said, in the right situation, these guys can mess you up, especially hellhounds. They're pretty brutal. But the same principle honestly goes for boss fights. The Spider and Butcher are very easy to take down and are thankfully getting rebalanced in 1.0, because in their current forms, the Spider rarely attacks you and the Butcher is super easy to kill, with the Assassin being the only one of the three that poses much of a threat. But other players will be closing in on these locations as a boss fight kicks off, so it can lead to some super intense standoffs as your team kills and banishes the boss to hell, but there are 3 or 4 other teams all trying to kill you at the same time. So you can be in a situation where you think you're safe, you're taking the boss, suddenly you're surrounded, you've gotten a little bit of damage from the boss, you run outside, and you're getting shot at immediately. And so the boss by himself, not hard. The boss combined with players, very, very difficult. There's nothing freakier in gaming than being on half HP after getting stabbed by the assassin in the ass, then hearing glass break outside or footsteps or zombie aggro, and then know, oh my god, there are people coming and they're trying to kill us. It forces you into a situation where you need to make decisions quickly, and very often, at least early on, it'll be the wrong one. But it's all a part of that steep learning curve, and I think it's a part of the reason the game is so replayable and fun. Very hard and very tactical game, but very rewarding to master, with tons of style and atmosphere to boot. Now, I've been praising the game a lot, but it definitely has its fair share of issues as well. For one, the optimization in Hunt Showdown is pretty atrocious. The game sometimes runs the exact same on high as it does on low. So if you lower all the graphics settings, you'll still get the exact same random FPS drops from 60 to 30 sometimes. And there is nothing in between. It won't go to 44 FPS, It won't go to 51 FPS, just straight from 60 to 30, even when there's nothing happening on screen, especially when nothing's happening on screen. You'll just be strolling through the woods or not even moving and performance just gets cut in half, and it's very jarring. You can imagine how bad that is when you're in the middle of a gunfight too, going for a headshot or lining up a grenade throw, and then your FPS gets cut in half or microstutters all over. That kind of stuff is frankly unacceptable in a competitive FPS, and the fact that it doesn't run smoothly on a lot of systems is very, very frustrating. Like for me personally, I'm able to run objectively better looking games at silky smooth 80 to 100 FPS, but I get random drops to 30 FPS in Hunt on low settings fairly frequently. You can see post after post after post and discussion after discussion online about it, and I know that there are people who get great performance out of Hunt Showdown. I fully believe it's optimized well for certain systems, but overall, I've been pretty unimpressed with how it runs. I think it's one of the biggest detriments of the game. But there are a few advantages to running the game on low settings like I do. You get less visual noise, so things stand out a bit more clearly, things like enemy hunters that you want to be able to see, and it does cut down on some of those jarring FPS drops as well. Not perfectly, not completely, but it does help. Stillwater Bayou in particular seems to run very poorly in comparison to Lost in Delta, so yeah. 100% you absolutely do miss out on some of the atmosphere and ambiance when you switch those graphics to low, which is unfortunate because I think it's one of the strongest points of the game, but to get that little bit smoother FPS and performance, I think it's worth it. And honestly, the gunplay is just so good that it kind of makes up for it. Now, desyncs with elevation are pretty common, where you'll be near a ledge and technically have fallen off, but the game takes 5 seconds to recognize this, so you'll teleport down and end up in a spot you didn't think you were in, and that can get you killed occasionally. That's also very frustrating. And one of the worst issues in the game right now is loading into a map with the assets not rendered properly. It'll look like Legoland with floating boxes and walls not showing up and characters T-posing as they run around. It happens way too much and just ends up looking very unpolished, and sometimes straight up prevents you from playing. Nothing is more frustrating than getting shot through 3 walls by someone you thought was wall hacking, only to realize later that they could probably just see through the entire building because it didn't render properly. That should never happen, especially not in a competitive FPS. Needs to get fixed before launch, 100%. Some of the enemies I don't think are designed very well, like water devils. Water is already severely punishing in a game where mobility is so important. You make a ton of noise crossing it. You are extremely susceptible to getting shot by enemy teams when you cross it. I'm fine that there's a monster in the water that can damage you when you're going through the swamps, but their aggro range, their speed, and their DPS is absurd for a monster that you can't reasonably kill if it gets on top of you. You can always run away, and in fact, that's what you're supposed to do. But honestly, I don't think they're a very well-designed monster. I think they probably need some changes. They're not OP, they won't kill you. They're just really annoying, and if you spawn in a place like Stillwater Bayou at Alain and Sons, there can be like 6 of them completely surrounding your spawn, and moving anywhere becomes incredibly unfun. It's just not a good mechanic. And there's also kind of an issue with spawning in general. I don't know if it's directly an issue, because that's a double-edged sword, right? There's a lot of times where you'll spawn in directly next to an enemy who can reach you within the first 30 seconds of the match. This is a double-edged sword because the one element, one hand, PvP is kind of what makes the game so fun and special, and the gunplay is amazing. So winning those fights early is a great way to start a match and really gets your blood pumping. But these maps are gigantic. It can take 10 minutes to go from one corner of the map to the other, so it's kind of bizarre to have games start and have 2 or 3 teams die in the opening couple of minutes when there are only 5 teams on the map, and it is a huge map. It can make it kind of feel a bit more empty than it really should. And one thing Hunt absolutely needs is more map variety. At the moment, there are only 2 maps, Stillwater Bayou and Lost in Delta, and I really think the game would benefit tremendously from a few more locations that break the mold of the Louisiana swamp aesthetic. A Colorado mining town or Blue Ridge Mountain lumberyard in the snow would be an awesome addition and help freshen things up really nicely. I think the blueprint is there for sure, it just needs more polish and it needs more map variety. But overall, Hunt Showdown is a game I would highly recommend heading towards its impending release in late August. The gunplay is fantastic, it is incredibly tense and exciting, kills feel earned and rewarding, and there are a ton of different playstyles and ways to roleplay that absolutely make it worth the money. Creating stories is a big selling point for Hunt Showdown. My partner and I could mention any of the epic games or epic fails we've had over the last 3 months and remember exactly how each of those went down. Like the time we both had Spectre shotguns and lost a point-blank gunfight to a single dude with a Winfield. Super embarrassing, but crazy stuff like that happens all the time. When you're on the winning side of that, it feels really good. Those highs are amazing. Getting a quad kill with a single bundle of dynamite, then banishing the boss and extracting as another team comes in to chase you off the map is crazy fun. There are a lot of little moments like that you can experience that I've never really had anything experienced like that in other games. And I think that alone is worth the price of admission. So let me know what you guys think of Hunt Showdown from what you've seen so far, and if you've gotten a chance to play. And I'll see you all in the next video. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.